Isabella Thorne built an empire behind a wall of ice, believing wealth was the only currency that mattered, until a soft-spoken immigrant with empty pockets taught her that the most valuable accounts are those of the heart. Welcome back to our channel. Kindly like and subscribe as we take you on this bittersweet love journey. The 47th floor of the Ethelred Holdings building was a temple to silence and steel. From her glass-walled sanctum, Isabella Thorne, hoe of Ethelred Bank, looked down upon London as if it were a live-action map of her domain. The morning sun glinted off the shard, a shard of light she felt she owned a piece of. At 38, her life was a study in precision, from the razor-sharp part in her chestnut hair to the immaculate line of her black Prada dress. Her reputation was her armor, brilliant, ruthless, and cold. A queen on a frozen throne. Her assistant, a young man named Ben, hovered at her door, a tablet shaking slightly in his hand. "Miss Thorne? The 9:15 is here. Mr. Adebayo. It's about the loan extension for his community center." Isabella didn't turn. "His financials are a disaster, Ben. Sentiment doesn't balance a ledger. Give me the summary. I want to be out of that meeting in 5 minutes." He's persistent. This is his third request for a meeting. "Persistence without capital is just noise," she said, her voice cool and flat. She finally turned, her eyes, the color of a winter sea, sweeping over him. 5 minutes. Across the city, in a small sunlit flat above a Kenyan grocery store in Brixton, Kofi Adebayo tied the laces on his worn but clean sneakers. The air smelled of spices and the faint, hopeful scent of the jasmine plant struggling on his windowsill. At 32, his body bore the memory of a different sun, the warmer, brighter one of his native Ghana. He looked at the framed photo on his dresser. A younger version of himself, smiling broadly, his arm around his father in front of the small, crumbling building in Accra that housed their dream, a community library and tech hub. His father was gone now, and the dream was Kofi's to carry alone. He smoothed down the lapels of his one good suit, a navy blue that was slightly too thin for the London chill. It didn't matter. Today he carried hope in his briefcase. Printed charts, community pledges, a business plan rewritten for the 5th time. The Ethelred Bank wasn't just a lender. It was the key to keeping his father's legacy and the futures of dozens of kids alive. He believed, with a faith that was as much a part of him as his heartbeat, that if he could just make them see the human value, the numbers would make sense. He locked his door, offering a silent prayer to his ancestors for strength. Not for wealth, but for the right words. Isabella's office was designed to intimidate. Vast, minimalist, the only personal touch a single stark abstract painting that looked to most like a black slash on a white canvas. It was how she felt inside most days. A defined shape, but one devoid of warm color. Kofi walked in and the space seemed to reject him. His footsteps were too quiet on the polished concrete floor. He stood before her desk, a solitary figure of earnest hope in a room built for cold transactions. "Mr. Adebayo," Isabella began, not inviting him to sit. "Your proposal has been reviewed extensively. The risk assessment is unequivocal." She tapped a single sheet of paper on her desk. "Your collateral is non-existent. Your projected revenue is based on optimistic community engagement, not hard data. Your personal savings are depleted." Kofi's smile was gentle, disarming. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Thorne. The data is important, I know. But if I may, the heart of the project, the potential." He opened his briefcase, pulling out a folder filled with children's drawings, crayon sketches of computers, books, their own hopeful futures. "This is the real collateral. The investment is in their humanity." Isabella's gaze didn't waver. She looked from the vibrant, clumsy drawings to his face, her expression unmoved. "Humanity doesn't pay interest, Mr. Adebayo. A bank deals in currency, not crayons." She slid the denial letter across the vast expanse of her desk. It was a great, uncrossable distance. "The application is denied. The decision is final." The dismissal was so absolute, so devoid of any flicker of empathy, that it stole the air from Kofi's lungs. He looked at the letter, then back at her, his brown eyes searching her cold blue ones for a crack, a hint of the person behind the title. He found nothing but polished ice. "I see," he said softly, the two words heavy with the weight of a crumbling dream. He carefully placed the children's drawings back into his briefcase, the click of the latch echoing in the silent room. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, a gesture of profound defeat, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused, his hand on the frame. He didn't look back, but his voice, though quiet, carried through the space with a clarity that was sharper than any shout. "A soul, Miss Thorne," he said. "It is also a thing that can be bankrupt." And then he was gone. Isabella remained standing, her hands resting on the cool glass of her desk. The room was silent once more. But the silence felt different now. It was no longer powerful, it was hollow. His final words hung in the air, an unwelcome ghost in her sterile temple. She shook her head, a sharp minute movement as if to dislodge them. But the echo had already found a home. The rest of Isabella's day unfolded with its usual brutal efficiency. She chaired a merger meeting where she dismantled a rival's proposal with surgical precision. She approved a round of layoffs in the Frankfurt branch, her signature a swift, sharp slash on the digital document. She did it all with the same detached focus, a conductor leading an orchestra of pure commerce. But beneath the surface, a strange static had taken hold. Kofi Adebayo's final words, "A soul, Miss Thorne. It is also a thing that can be bankrupt," kept replaying in her mind, an irritating loop she couldn't mute. It was nonsense, of course. Sentimental and profitable nonsense. She dealt in reality, in assets and liabilities, not in the abstract, flimsy concept of a soul. At 7 p.m. she dismissed her driver. The hollow silence of her penthouse felt more oppressive than usual. She decided to walk. It was a futile attempt to outpace the disquiet, to let the chill evening air and the anonymous rush of the city scrub her mind clean. She walked for blocks, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the pavement, a sound that usually made her feel powerful and seen. Tonight it just felt loud. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel, ironic sense of timing. The rain started as a drizzle, then escalated into a relentless, cold downpour. Isabella, without an umbrella, ducked for cover under the awning of a closed boutique. She was cursing her own impulsiveness, her silk blouse now plastered to her skin, when her phone buzzed. A text from Ben. "Security alert. Attempted breach on the internal server. All senior staff advised to change passwords immediately." A wave of irritation washed over her. Another problem to solve. She pulled out her phone, her fingers cold and clumsy, to access the secure banking app. She typed her complex password. The screen flashed. Error. Reauthentication required. She tried again, her frustration mounting. Another error. In her haste and annoyance, she must have triggered the security lockout. 3 failed attempts. Her account was temporarily frozen. A profound, ridiculous helplessness settled over her. She was Isabella Thorne, one of the most powerful financial minds in London, and she was standing in the rain, locked out of her own digital fortune, unable to hail a cab because her ride app was linked to the same account. She had £100 in her wallet, but the thought of flagging down a black cab and fumbling with cash felt beneath her, a public admission of a private failure. She looked around, her gaze desperate, and it landed on a warm, glowing sign a few doors down. The Spice Road, a small, independent coffee shop she would never normally frequent. It was her only option. Pushing the door open, a bell jingled overhead. The air was thick with the rich, earthy scent of coffee and something else, something warm and spicy like cinnamon and cardamom. It was a cluttered, cozy space, a stark contrast to her minimalist world. And there, behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with a quiet, focused grace, was Kofi Adebayo. He looked up as the door closed, his expression one of polite, automatic welcome. Then he saw her. The recognition was instant, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a calm, unreadable neutrality. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply waited. Isabella felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. Of all the places, of all the people. She straightened her spine, summoning every ounce of her remaining authority, and walked to the counter, her wet shoes squeaking on the wooden floor. "Mr. Adebayo," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Miss Thorne," he replied, his voice even. "You're a long way from the 47th floor." I seem to be having a technical issue with my bank," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I need to use a phone. A landline. To call my IT department." It was a command, not a request, a last, desperate grasp for control. Kofi looked at her for a long moment, his gaze taking in her drenched hair, her soaked clothing, the slight, almost imperceptible tremble in her hands that was from more than just the cold. He saw the powerful CO, brought low by a simple password and a rainstorm. He saw the woman, stripped of her title and her armor. He didn't reach for a phone. Instead, he turned and picked up a large ceramic mug. "The phones are for employees," he said calmly. "But the first thing you need isn't a phone call. It's to get warm. Or you'll catch your death." He began to move, his hands a quiet ballet of purpose. He steamed milk, he ground beans, he poured hot water over a tea bag she couldn't identify. He did it all without looking at her, giving her the space to simply exist in her state of undignified vulnerability. The silence between them was thick, charged not with the professional hostility of their morning meeting, but with something else entirely, a raw, unvarnished humanity. After a minute, he placed the mug on the counter in front of her. It was filled with a fragrant, pale golden liquid, with a slice of lemon floating on top. "Ginger, honey, and lemon," he said. "It won't fix your bank account, but it will fix you." Isabella stared at the mug. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to reassert her dominance, to remind him who she was. But the warmth radiating from the ceramic was a siren's call. Her body was shaking. Slowly, hesitantly, she wrapped her chilled fingers around the mug. The heat was a shock, a searing, beautiful pain that traveled up her arms and into her chest. She brought the mug to her lips and took a small sip. The flavor exploded on her tongue, spicy, sweet, and sharp all at once. It was the most real, the most present thing she had experienced in years. It was an act of simple, profound kindness, offered without expectation of repayment, to the person who had just hours before shattered his dream. In that moment, holding the warm mug in that tiny, fragrant shop, with the rain drumming against the window and this man watching her with quiet, knowing eyes, the foundation of Isabella Thorne's world didn't just crack. Shattered. The cold heart she had nurtured for so long, the one she believed was her greatest strength, gave a single painful and undeniable thud. The warmth of the tea was a traitor. It seeped through Isabella, thawing places that had been frozen for so long she'd forgotten they could feel. The heat felt like a blush of shame. She stood there, a dripping statue in a puddle of her own making, clinging to the mug as if it were a lifeline, all while her mind screamed in rebellion. This was absurd. This man, this place, this gesture. It was a strategic weakness. He was trying to manipulate her, to soften her. It had to be. No one was this kind without a price. She took another sip, the honey coating her throat, and she hated how good it felt. "I should go," she said, her voice rough. She set the half-finished mug down on the counter with a definitive click. "I need to resolve my situation. Kofi was wiping down the steam wand, his back to her. The rain hasn't let up. And you're still shivering. He said it not as a plea but as a simple statement of fact, which was somehow more infuriating. I am perfectly capable of managing, she retorted, the ice returning to her tone by sheer force of will. She pulled her wet blouse away from her skin, a futile attempt at dignity. I appreciate the beverage. Please add it to my bill. I'll have my assistant settle it. He turned then, and his expression wasn't one of anger or resentment. It was a look of profound, unsettling pity. There is no bill, Miss Thorne. It was just a cup of tea. That pity was worse than any insult. It dismantled her, reducing her from a powerful adversary to an object of charity. She felt her cheeks burn. I don't accept handouts. It wasn't a handout, he said calmly. It was one human being seeing another caught in the rain. You would have done the same. The statement was so blatantly, ridiculously false that it hung in the air between them. No, she would not have. She would have walked past, her mind already on her next meeting, dismissing the person as an unfortunate statistic. The certainty of that truth was a cold stone in her gut. You need to use a phone, he continued, as if they were having a normal conversation. He gestured to an old, corded phone mounted on the wall near a stack of cardboard boxes. It's there. The international codes are on a sticky note. He was making it impossible for her to maintain her anger. His refusal to engage in her conflict, his quiet, persistent decency, was a form of psychological warfare she had no defense against. She marched to the phone, her body stiff, each step a declaration of her independence from this place and this man. She dialed the number for her head of IT, a man named Robert who lived and breathed firewalls. The phone rang once, twice. Robert, she barked into the receiver, turning her back to Kofi. It's Thorne. I've triggered a security lockout on my primary account. I need you to. Isabella? Is that you? Robert's voice was fuzzy with sleep. Do you know what time it is? The system-wide password reset isn't until 8 a.m. There's nothing I can do from here. Security protocol. You know this. Isabella closed her eyes, a fresh wave of helplessness washing over her. She, the architect of the bank's ruthless security protocols, was now their victim. There's no override, no emergency bypass. Not for this. Not until the system reset. It's to prevent exactly what we feared, a coordinated late-night attack. You're just locked out. Until 8 a.m. He yawned audibly. Is there anything else? My wife is. No. Nothing else. She hung up the phone with a dull thud. The finality of it was a prison sentence. She was stranded. Powerless. She rested her forehead against the cool wall, the fight draining out of her. Behind her she heard the soft clatter of mugs, the running of water. She didn't turn. She couldn't bear to see the look on his face now. He had witnessed her complete and total defeat. The night bus is unreliable in this weather, Kofi's voice came, gentle but firm. And the hotels nearby are full of tourists. You are welcome to wait here until the rain stops at least. Isabella finally turned. He was taking off his apron, folding it neatly. The shop was closed. She was alone with him, the rejected and the rejecter, trapped together by a quirk of fate and a failed password. Every instinct told her to run, to walk out into the rain and never look back. But the rational part of her brain, the part that assessed risk, knew he was right. She was stuck. She gave a tight, reluctant nod. I will wait for the rain to ease. She retreated to a small wooden table in the corner, as far from him as the small space would allow. She sat upright, her hands clasped in her lap, a queen in exile. She would wait. She would not speak. She would not acknowledge this shared space. She would resist the unsettling calm he projected and the terrifying vulnerability blooming inside her. This was not a connection. It was a temporary ceasefire in a war she still intended to win. The rain did not ease. It intensified, hammering against the windows of the coffee shop with a newfound fury, a solid sheet of water that turned the world outside into a blurry, impressionist painting. The wind howled, rattling the sign above the door. A sudden, sharp crack of lightning split the sky, followed almost instantly by a boom of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. And then, with a soft sigh, the lights in the coffee shop flickered, dipped, and went out. They were plunged into a deep, velvety darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the room in stark, momentary snapshots. Isabella gasped, a small, involuntary sound she immediately regretted. "Are you all right?" Kofi's voice came from the counter, calm amidst the chaos. "I'm fine," she said too quickly, her heart thudding against her ribs. The darkness was an enemy. It stripped away her bearings, her composure. He could be anywhere. He could be anyone. She heard him moving, his footsteps sure and familiar in the space. A drawer opened and closed. Then the warm, gentle glow of a candle flame bloomed in the darkness. He lit a second, then a third, placing them in jars around the small space. The room was transformed again. No longer a brightly lit shop, but an intimate, shadowy cave. The candlelight dancing on the walls and painting his features in soft gold and deep umber. "It's the old grid on this street," he explained, his voice a low rumble that competed with the rain. "It always goes out in a proper storm. It should be back in an hour. Or 3. An hour. Or 3. The sentence was a life sentence. Isabella felt the walls of her resistance beginning to crumble under the sheer weight of the circumstance. There was no fighting this. There was only enduring it. Kofi pulled out a second chair from another table and sat at a respectful distance from her, the small table between them. He didn't look at her, instead gazing out at the storm. "In Ghana," he said almost to himself, "the rain is different. It is warm. Comes down hard and fast, and you can smell the earth waking up. It is a celebration. This." He gestured to the window. "This feels like a punishment." The observation was so poetic, so utterly foreign to her way of thinking, that it caught her off guard. She saw rain as an inconvenience, a factor that disrupted transport and required an umbrella. She had never considered its emotional temperature. "It's just weather," she said, her voice sounding brittle in the quiet room. "Is it?" he asked, turning his head to look at her. In the candlelight, his eyes were deep pools of kindness and something else, a weary wisdom. "Or is it a force that reminds us we are not in control? That all our plans, our passwords, our power?" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. It was all an illusion. She had no rebuttal. The evidence was overwhelming. She was sitting in the dark, in a poor immigrant's coffee shop, locked out of her entire life because of the weather. A long silence stretched between them, but it was different from the tense silence in her office. This one was filled with the soundtrack of the storm, the drumming rain, the moaning wind, the occasional distant siren. It was a silence they were sharing, not a weapon they were wielding. "Your community center," Isabella found herself saying, the words leaving her mouth before her brain could censor them. "The one with the drawings." She couldn't believe she was bringing it up. It was a tactical error, opening a door she had firmly bolted shut. He looked surprised, then a small, sad smile touched his lips. "The Amani Project." Amani means peace in Swahili. "My father's dream. It is on hold." "Why a library? And a tech hub?" The questions felt clunky, like a business inquiry, but she was genuinely curious. What was the profit motive? What was the angle? "My father was a teacher," Kofi said, his gaze drifting back to the candle flame. "He believed that knowledge was the only true inheritance you could give a child, that no one could ever take away. But he also saw that the world was changing. Books alone were not enough. You need to bridge the digital divide. You need to give them access to the global conversation." So he wanted a place where the smell of old paper and the hum of new computers could exist together. Where a child could fall in love with a story in a book, then learn how to write their own code to tell a new one. He spoke with a passion that was quiet but absolute. It wasn't the desperate pitch of a man begging for a loan. It was the steady conviction of a man stating his fundamental truth. Isabella listened, truly listened. She saw the business model not as a charity case, but as a long-term investment in human capital. It was unorthodox, high risk, but the potential yield. The yield wasn't just financial. It was societal. It was generational. She found herself dissecting his proposal not with her usual cold calculus, but with a new, unfamiliar lens. What if the projections weren't just optimistic but visionary? What if the community engagement wasn't a variable but the core asset? Another silence fell, but this one was contemplative. The storm raged on, but inside the little shop, a fragile, tentative bridge had been built across the darkness between them. The forced proximity was no longer just physical. It was becoming intellectual, emotional. She was no longer just a CEO trapped with a customer. She was a woman listening to a man's dream, and for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't immediately looking for the flaws. She was simply hearing him. The storm continued its symphony, but it was a distant thing now, the backdrop to the quiet space they occupied. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. Kofi's story hung in the air, a tangible thing between them. Isabella found her professional facade, the one she had clutched so tightly, beginning to dissolve in the intimate gloom. The banker in her, the part that lived and breathed risk assessment, was still awake, but it was now asking different questions. "Your father," she began, her voice softer than she intended. It was strange, not using her boardroom tone. "He sounds like a remarkable man. To have such a vision." He paused, a difficult admission forming. "It's a more sophisticated model than I initially credited." Kofi looked at her, the candlelight catching the sheen of unshed tears in his eyes. He gave a slow, heavy nod. He saw the future in the eyes of the children who had nothing. "He died a year ago. Fever. It was very fast." He swallowed, the memory of physical pain. "The last thing he said to me was, 'Do not let the light go out, Kofi. Promise me.'" The weight of that promise filled the small space. Isabella felt it settle on her own shoulders, a burden she had casually dismissed hours earlier. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, the words feeling inadequate, a phrase she used at corporate funerals. But this time she meant it. "Thank you," he whispered. He was silent for a moment, gathering himself. "I used all my savings, everything I had, to keep the building in Accra and to start the process here. I came to London because I believed if I could just find the right person, someone who could see past the immediate numbers to the long-term yield and human potential." He trailed off, and his gaze, when it met hers, was not accusatory but profoundly weary. "I thought, perhaps foolishly, that a leader of a great institution might understand that." The unspoken words, that you might be that person, hung in the air. And instead of anger, Isabella felt a deep, unsettling shame. She had not been a leader in that meeting. She had been a gatekeeper. "It's not that simple, Kofi," she said, a defensive note creeping in. "A bank has shareholders. Regulations. We can't fund every heartfelt story." "I know," he said, not with bitterness but with a devastating clarity. "But you can fund some. You chose not to fund mine. That is your right. But do not tell me it is because you could not. Tell me it is because you would not." The distinction was a scalpel expertly applied. It laid bare the truth she hid from herself. Her decisions were not always about cold, hard fact. They were about her own fears, her own carefully constructed walls. She looked away, her eyes falling on the stack of cardboard boxes she had noticed earlier near the phone. One of them was open, and the lightning flash illuminated its contents not as coffee supplies, but as a jumble of personal items. And nestled on top, she saw a small, framed photograph and a familiar, vibrant splash of color. It was one of the children's drawings from his briefcase. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she stood and walked to the box. Kofi watched her but didn't stop her. She picked up the drawing. It was of a stick-figure family holding hands in front of a building with the words, Amani Library, scrawled in green crayon across the top. And then she picked up the small silver-framed photograph beside it. It was a picture of a younger Kofi, beaming with pride, his arm around a beautiful woman with a radiant smile and intelligent eyes. They were standing in what looked like a university courtyard. And nestled between them, held in the woman's arms, was a little girl no more than 3 years old, with Kofi's eyes and her mother's smile. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the picture, at the clear, unadulterated joy on Kofi's face. A joy that was now absent, replaced by a resilient but deep-seated sorrow. "Who?" she started, but her voice failed her. Kofi's voice was a low, raw wound in the dark. "Her name was Amina. My wife. And our daughter, Nala." Isabella turned to him, the question screaming in her silence. "A car accident," he said, the words simple and utterly devastating. 6 months after my father died. They were coming to visit me here. I was supposed to be on that flight with them. But I stayed behind in London for one more meeting. One more chance to get the loan." He let out a shuddering breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. "I was in a bank, presenting charts and graphs, while my world ended on a tarmac in Abuja." The revelation landed not like a bomb, but like a depth charge, sinking deep and exploding silently within Isabella's soul. The pieces of his life snapped into a horrifying, heartbreaking picture. The community center wasn't just a business plan. It wasn't just his father's dream. It was his memorial. To his father, to his wife, to his daughter. It was the only thing he had left to build, the only way to keep his promise and to keep their light from going out. And she, Isabella Thorne, had callously denied him, reducing his entire life's purpose, his grief, his love, to a line item on a risk assessment report. She looked from the drawing in her hand, the hopeful crayon dream of a child who would never see it, to the man sitting broken in the candlelight. The cold heart she had worn as a badge of honor now felt like a lead weight in her chest, a grotesque and useless thing. She had been judging his financial stability while he was trying to survive the unsurvivable. She had been worried about interest rates while he was drowning in a sea of loss. In that moment, Isabella didn't just see Kofi Adebayo, the poor immigrant customer. She saw a man of immense strength. A man who had lost everything and still found a reason to get up every day and serve coffee, to fight for a dream, to offer kindness to the woman who had kicked him when he was down. And she saw herself truly for the first time. Not as a powerful CEO, but as a small, frightened woman hiding in a fortress of her own making. A fortress that was suddenly terribly empty. The photograph felt heavy in Isabella's hand, a tiny window into a universe of love and loss she could scarcely comprehend. She placed it back into the box with a reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. The crinkled crayon drawing she laid beside it, a testament to a future that was being fought for in the ashes of the past. She turned back to Kofi. The storm outside was finally beginning to abate, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the thunder retreating into a distant grumble. The silence in the room was no longer charged with tension, but thick with a shared, painful understanding. She didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," was a pathetic, hollow currency for the debt of suffering he had just revealed. Any words about business, about loans, about risk, would have been a grotesque insult. So, for the first time in her adult life, Isabella Thorne chose to stop talking. She chose to listen to the silence and to her own racing heart. She walked back to the table and sat down, not in the defensive, upright posture from before, but with her shoulders slumped, her hands resting open on the table. It was a posture of surrender. "I lost my mother when I was 12, she heard herself say. The words came out unbidden, a quiet confession in the candlelight. She never spoke of this. She had buried it so deep she sometimes convinced herself it didn't matter. But now, faced with the raw geography of his grief, her own hidden landscape rose to the surface. Kofi looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't speak, just listened. Ovarian cancer, she continued, her gaze fixed on the dancing flame of the nearest candle. It was slow, and it was expensive. My father, he was a good man but not a strong one. He watched the medical bills drain our life, our savings, his spirit. He kept saying, if only we had more. If only we were stronger. He died 2 years after her, of a broken heart, I think. They left me nothing but a mountain of debt and a single, unshakable lesson. She finally looked at him, her winter sea eyes glistening in the dim light. That sentiment is a luxury. That love makes you vulnerable. That the only real security in this world is financial. So I built a fortress. I thought if I could just be powerful enough, rich enough, I could never be hurt like that again. I could never be that helpless. She gave a short, bitter laugh. And now here I am, locked out of my own fortress, sitting in the dark, completely helpless. The irony is rather absolute. Kofi watched her, and for the first time she saw no pity in his gaze. She saw recognition. A shared human understanding of the different shapes pain can take. Grief is a currency we all spend, Miss Thorne, he said softly. But we are not meant to spend it alone in a vault. My father also taught me that a library is not just a storehouse for books. It is a community for stories. Your pain, my pain, they are just stories waiting to be shared. To be heard. That is how the light gets in. That is how the light gets in. The phrase slipped past her defenses and settled in a place she had long considered dead. She thought of her sterile penthouse, her silent office, the years of meals eaten alone. She had built a vault, yes, but she had been living inside it, slowly suffocating. Isabella, she said, the name sounding strange on her own lips. Please, call me Isabella. A small, genuine smile, the first she had ever seen from him, touched Kofi's mouth. It transformed his entire face, banishing the shadows of sorrow, if only for a moment. Isabella, he repeated, and her name in his accent was a soft melody. And you should call the project Amani and Nala, she said, the idea forming fully and perfectly in her mind. It should carry their names. Not just your father's dream, but their legacy too. Kofi's breath hitched. He looked at her, truly seen and understood, and the gratitude in his eyes was a more powerful force than any business deal she had ever closed. I would like that, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Just then, with a soft hum and a series of clicks, the power returned. The overhead lights flickered on, harsh and intrusive after the gentle candlelight. The spell was broken. The modern world, with all its demands and complexities, came rushing back in. But something fundamental had shifted. The air between them was clear now. The war was over. Isabella didn't immediately jump for her phone. She simply looked at Kofi, this man who had lost everything yet still possessed a wealth of spirit she could only envy. She felt a fragile but very real connection. A bond forged in shared vulnerability and the quiet aftermath of the storm. It felt for the first time in 26 years like the beginning of healing. The return of the electricity was a jarring transition. The warm, intimate cave was gone, replaced by the stark reality of the coffee shop under fluorescent lights. The candles, once their sole source of illumination, now looked small and feeble. The spell was broken, but the connection remained, a delicate new thread between them. Isabella's phone, now charged from an outlet behind the counter, suddenly came to life, buzzing violently on the table. The screen lit up with a cascade of missed calls, emails, and urgent notifications from her lockdown world. The sight of it was like a summons from a past life. Kofi watched her, the shared peace of moments ago still softening his features. "The world wants its queen back," he said, his tone gentle, without a trace of malice. Before she could respond, her phone rang again. The caller ID read Benjamin Carter, chairman. Her stomach tightened. Ben Carter was the octogenarian chairman of the board, her most powerful supporter and, at times, her most formidable critic. Ignoring him was not an option. She gave Kofi an apologetic glance and answered. "Ben, I can explain. There was a security lockout, a storm." "Isabella." His voice was a dry, crackling parchment, cutting her off. "The Frankfurt layoffs. The press has it. They're calling it the Thorn Massacre. The board is having conniptions. Where are you? Your driver has been waiting at the office for hours." Up in her penthouse, the silence was absolute. It was no longer a symbol of her control, but a screaming emptiness. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the city, but she didn't see her kingdom. She saw 1,000 tiny lights, 1,000 lives, 1,000 stories of struggle and love and loss that she had spent her entire life ignoring, dismissing as unquantifiable variables. She had a choice to make. The easy choice was the one Ben Carter and the entire board expected. She would get on the conference call. She would deploy her famous cold precision, her ruthless logic. She would spin the Frankfurt layoffs into a narrative of necessary strength, of streamlining for future growth. She would win. The stock would stabilize. Her fortress would remain intact, its walls higher and thicker than ever. She could bury the events of this night, the memory of Kofi Adebayo, deep beneath a mountain of new acquisitions and quarterly reports. She could choose pride. Then she looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She saw a ghost, a woman in a wet, wrinkled designer dress, her hair a mess, her eyes hollow. She saw the 12-year-old girl, terrified and helpless, watching her world dissolve. She had spent a lifetime running from that girl, building a fortress to lock her away. Kofi hadn't offered her a fortress. He had offered her a window. He had seen the scared girl inside the Ice Queen, and he hadn't looked away. He had shared his own devastating loss, not to garner pity but to forge a connection. He had believed for a moment that she was capable of more. And she had failed him. The hard choice was to be vulnerable. To admit she was wrong. Not just about a loan application but about the fundamental architecture of her life. It was to choose a path that had no guaranteed ROI, that was fraught with emotional risk, that offered no security except the terrifying, fragile hope of a real connection. She picked up her phone. The conference call was starting in 2 minutes. She opened the dial-in link, her finger hovering over the screen. Back in the Spice Road, Kofi blew out the candles one by one. The scent of smoke filled the air, the final funereal note to the night's strange symphony. The shop was clean, everything in its place, but it felt emptier than it ever had before. He had sent her away. He had to. Her offer, however well-intentioned, had felt like a violation. It had reduced the sacred memory of his family to a fundraising tool. It had confirmed his deepest fear, that in the eyes of the powerful, his dream, his love, his loss, would always be a charity case, never an equal venture. He had a choice to make. The easy choice was to let the bitterness take root, to harden his own heart, to tell himself that he had been a fool to believe, even for a second, that a woman like Isabella Thorne could ever truly see him as anything other than a project. He could let the Amani and Nala project die, a testament to a world that had no room for dreams without collateral. He could choose the safety of cynicism, the familiar comfort of justified anger. He looked around the small shop at the boxes containing his old life. He picked up the photograph of Amina and Nala. Their smiles were frozen in time, a beacon of a joy that felt 1,000,000 miles away. What would they want? Would they want him to give up? To let the light go out because his pride had been wounded? Or would they want him to fight with the same relentless hope that had defined him? Isabella had been wrong. Her method had been clumsy, arrogant. But the impulse, had it been entirely selfish? He remembered the look in her eyes when she spoke of her mother. He remembered her confession in the dark. That was not the act of a calculating CEO. That was the raw, unvarnished truth of a wounded human being. Perhaps her offer wasn't just about guilt. Perhaps it was the only language she knew. The only tool she had. She had tried to give him what she believed was the most valuable thing in the world. She had been wrong, but she had tried. The hard choice was to forgive. To extend a grace he was not sure he possessed. To believe that people, even the most frozen of hearts, were capable of change. It was to risk being hurt again, to risk being seen as naive, for the sliver of a chance that the connection they had forged was real and could be rebuilt on a foundation of true respect. He picked up his phone. He had her card, the thick, embossed rectangle she had given him in her office a lifetime ago. He typed a message, his thumbs moving slowly, deliberately, each word a risk. The offer of a grant. It came from the wrong place. But the woman who made it in the candlelight. I believe she was coming from the right one. A partnership is not about money. It is about shared vision. If you still have one, you know where to find me. He did not hit send. His thumb rested over the button, the choice suspended in the digital ether. Down in the lobby of her building, Isabella stood perfectly still. The phone in her hand rang, a soft, insistent trill. The conference call was waiting. The world of Ben Carter and quarterly reports and the Thorn massacre was waiting. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the deepest of her life. And she made her choice. She pressed the button on her screen. But not to connect the call. She declined it. Then she turned, her heels clicking with a new, determined rhythm on the marble floor, and walked back out into the breaking dawn. The first light of dawn was painting the London sky in streaks of rose and gold as Isabella walked. She didn't hail a cab. She needed the time, the rhythm of her steps on the damp pavement, to solidify the choice she had made. With every block she put between herself and her old life, the heavy, leaden feeling in her chest began to lighten, replaced by a fluttering, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of freedom. She arrived at the Spice Road just as the sun crested the buildings, setting the wet streets ablaze. The closed sign was still turned, but the door was unlocked. She pushed it open, the bell jingling its familiar, gentle chime. Kofi was standing by the counter, his phone in his hand, his thumbs still hovering over the screen. He looked up as she entered, his expression a complex tapestry of surprise, caution, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. They stood in silence for a long moment, the early morning sun streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between them. The shop was clean, the candles were out, and the ghosts of the night had been banished by the new day. Isabella spoke first, her voice clear and soft, devoid of its former armor. I declined the conference call. Kofi's breath left him in a slow, quiet sigh. He placed his phone on the counter. I was about to send a message, he said. I did not know if you would ever read it. I'm glad I'm here to hear it instead, she replied. He walked around the counter until he was standing before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. The message was this: I was wrong to call you impoverished. You are one of the richest people I know. You just forgot where you kept your treasure. He gestured not to her but to her heart. It is not in a bank vault. It is in here. In the capacity to feel, to change, to be vulnerable. That is a currency that never devalues. Tears, warm and unbidden, filled Isabella's eyes. They were not tears of shame or sadness, but of release. Of being truly seen and accepted. And I was wrong, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her admission. So terribly wrong. I offered you a handout when what you deserved was a hand. A partnership. She took a small, hesitant step forward. So I am here, Kofi. Not as the CEO of Ethelred Bank, but as Isabella. A woman who believes fiercely in the Amani and Nala project. A woman who wants to help you build it not with a grant but with my time, my mind, and my connections. As your partner. If you'll still have me. She extended her hand not for a business handshake but palm up, an open and vulnerable offering. Kofi looked at her hand, then at her face, at the raw, honest hope shining in her tear-filled eyes. The last of the walls around his own heart crumbled. A slow, radiant smile spread across his face, the sunrise reflected in his joy. He placed his hand in hers. His grip was warm, strong, and certain. "I can think of no one I would rather have by my side," he said. He didn't let go. Neither did she. The space between them closed, not with a sudden rush, but with a gentle, inevitable gravity. He cupped her cheek with his other hand, his thumb gently wiping away a stray tear. "Isabella," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. And then he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion but of promise. A seal on their new beginning. It was soft and lingering, filled with the shared memory of the storm, the candlelight, the pain, and the profound, unexpected love that had grown from the rubble of their old lives. When they finally parted, the world had shifted on its axis. The rude CEO and the poor immigrant were gone, replaced by two souls equal at last, standing together in the dawn. 1 year later. The air in Accra was warm and thick with the scent of rain and earth. Isabella stood with Kofi, their fingers interlaced, before a beautiful, newly constructed building. The sign above the door read, "Amani and Nala Community Center, a library for the future." The sound of children's laughter echoed from inside, mingling with the gentle hum of computers. It was a fusion of their worlds. The elegant, efficient design was Isabella's influence. The heart and soul of the programs within were Kofi's. She had used her expertise to create a sustainable, scalable model, leveraging her network not for donations, but for partnerships with tech firms and educational foundations. They had built it together as true partners. She looked at Kofi, at the unburdened joy on his face as he watched a group of children crowd around a new terminal. He was her home now. Not a penthouse, not a corner office, but this man and the life they were building together. It was a love she had never expected, a love that had been waiting for her all along, hidden in a storm, in a cup of tea, in the courage to be vulnerable. He turned to her, his eyes full of a love so deep it still took her breath away. "You see," he said softly, echoing his words from a year ago, but with a new, profound meaning. "This is how the light gets in." She squeezed his hand, her heart full to bursting. "No, my love," she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "This is how the light gets out." This story was about finding love and purpose in the most unexpected place. Where have you found an unexpected blessing that changed your life? Share your story in the comments. We read every single one.